The morning light crept through the kitchen window, soft and gold, catching on the rows of polished glassware I'd set out the night before. Thanksgiving morning, my favorite day of the year. For 30 years, my wife Margaret and I had built our own tradition. Early coffee, quiet music, the smell of herbs and roasting turkey filling every corner of the house. Even after she passed, I kept the ritual alive. It made me feel close to her. This year, though, it was special. Jennifer, our only daughter, and her husband David had promised they'd come for dinner. I hadn't seen much of them lately, not since they moved out 3 months ago. The house had been quieter, emptier, the echoes sharper. So when Jennifer agreed to spend Thanksgiving with me, it felt like a gift. I woke before dawn, excitement stirring me out of bed. The air was cold, the kind of crisp that makes your breath visible, and the hardwood floors chilled my feet. I brewed a pot of coffee, measured the grounds exactly as Margaret used to, one heaping spoonful for each cup, plus one for the pot. Old habits die hard. The familiar smell filled the kitchen, rich and bitter and grounding. The turkey, a plump 20-pounder I'd picked up 2 days earlier, sat in the sink. I rinsed it carefully, patted it dry with paper towels, and seasoned it the same way Margaret taught me. Sage, thyme, black pepper, salt, and a whisper of lemon zest rubbed beneath the skin. I whispered to the bird, as if speaking to Margaret through the motions. There, that's how you liked it. Crisp outside, tender inside. At 7 a mile, I called Jennifer. She answered on the fourth ring. Yeah, Dad, 7. We'll be there, she said, her tone distracted, a hum of traffic in the background. I'm making all your favorites. Sweet potato casserole, green beans with almonds, the cranberry sauce from scratch. Great. Got to run. See you tonight. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down and stared at it for a moment. It wasn't unusual. Jennifer always sounded busy. Still, I had imagined her voice with a little more warmth. I shook the thought off. The day was too full of promise to let melancholy settle in. The hours passed in a rhythm I'd perfected over decades. Chop, stir, taste, adjust. The kitchen came alive, pots clanging, the oven humming softly, the scent of butter and roasted garlic wrapping around me like an old blanket. I turned on the radio, the old station that still played soft jazz, and hummed along. By noon, the turkey was roasting beautifully, its skin turning the color of caramel. I basted it every half hour, whispering quiet thanks to the empty air. I could almost hear Margaret laughing behind me, teasing, "You're fussing too much, Elwood. Let the turkey breathe." I smiled at the memory. Still bossing me around from the other side, aren't you? At 2 o'clock, I started on dessert, pumpkin pie, her recipe, with a hint of cinnamon and clove. I remembered how Jennifer used to sneak spoonfuls of the filling before it went into the oven. She'd always say, "It tastes better raw, Dad." Maybe she'd laugh about it tonight. Maybe for a few hours it would feel like old times again. As the afternoon stretched on, the house filled with warmth. The golden light of late November spilled across the dining room. I set the table with care. Margaret's good china, white with blue rims from our wedding day. Linen napkins folded into perfect triangles. Silverware polished until it caught the light. I placed rust-colored chrysanthemums in the center, the kind she loved. By 5:30, everything was ready. The food, the table, the candles, all waiting. The smell of roasted turkey mingled with sage and butter, rich enough to make my mouth water. I went upstairs, changed into a pressed shirt and slacks, and checked my watch. 6:30. They'd said 7. Right on time for dinner, I poured myself a small glass of water and sat in my chair at the head of the table. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. 7 o'clock. I smiled, imagining them pulling into the driveway, coats buttoned against the chill. 7:15. The smile began to fade. 7:30. No message, no call. Maybe traffic, I thought. Maybe David's car trouble again. They'd been taking Ubers lately. 8 o'clock. I stood by the window peering into the darkness outside. The driveway was empty. The street was quiet. I texted Jennifer, keeping my tone light. "Where are you? Everything's getting cold." Did something happen? The message showed delivered. Then, for a moment, the familiar 3 dots appeared. My heart lifted. She was typing. Then they disappeared, reappeared, disappeared again. Finally, the message came through. Old man, we flew to Europe to get away from you. Stop bothering us. I read it once, then again, then a third time. The words didn't change. Old man, flew to Europe, get away from you. I placed the phone carefully on the table beside the folded napkin. My hands were steady. I noticed that oddly. My breathing too, slow, even. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window pane. The candles flickered, their flames bending low, wax pooling at their bases. The turkey sat in the center of the table, gleaming under the soft light. The cranberry sauce shimmered in its crystal dish. Everything perfect, everything untouched. I looked at the three empty chairs, Jennifer's, David's, and Margaret's. My throat tightened, but no tears came. I had cried too many times in this house already. A knock startled me. I turned, hesitated, then opened the door just enough to see Linda Harrison, my neighbor. Her expression was gentle but concerned. Elwood, I saw your lights on. Everything all right? I thought you'd have family over tonight. I forced a smile. They're just running late. You know how kids are. Her eyes drifted past me to the untouched feast behind. If you need anything, I appreciate it, Linda. Good night. Before she could reply, I closed the door softly. Through the window, I watched her cross back to her house, glancing over her shoulder once. Then the lights next door went out. Silence returned. I sat back at the table. The candles were nearly gone, the flames small and tired. I thought of Jennifer's laughter when she was 8, the way she used to run down the hallway in her socks, her hair flying behind her. Dad, I'm faster than you, she'd yell, her giggles echoing off the walls. I remembered her teenage years, the fights, the slammed doors, the apologies that always followed. When Margaret got sick, Jennifer was only 22. She had stayed up with her in the hospital those last nights, holding her mother's hand. I'll take care of him, Mom, she'd whispered. I'd heard her. I'd believed her. Now I sat alone at a table meant for 3. I picked up the carving knife, studied the reflection of the candles on its blade. My hands were still steady. The turkey's surface had cooled, a thin film of fat dulling its shine. The smell was different now, heavy, stale. For a long moment, I just sat there listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the quiet groan of the house settling. Then I put down the knife, stood, and blew out the candles. Smoke curled upward, ghostly ribbons in the dim light. The house went dark. Upstairs in the silence of my room, I looked at the framed photos on the dresser. Margaret in her garden, Jennifer on her wedding day, me standing between them with pride that now felt foolish. I lay down but didn't close my eyes. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks cracked the sky. Maybe someone celebrating early, maybe nothing at all. The phone sat on the nightstand, the cruel message glowing faintly on the screen. Old man, we flew to Europe to get away from you. Stop bothering us. I turned the phone face down and the light went out. The darkness pressed in close, thick and absolute. I thought I would cry. I didn't. Instead, I whispered into the stillness, Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart. And for the first time in years, I felt something break quietly inside me, something that had held on far too long. Morning crept in slow and heavy, the kind that doesn't bring light so much as it reveals how gray everything really is. The Thanksgiving table was still there, exactly as I'd left it. Cold turkey, half-melted candles, untouched plates. A quiet museum of what was supposed to be family. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept replaying the text like a cruel lullaby. Old man, we flew to Europe to get away from you. The words felt unreal at first. Something said in anger. A joke maybe. But Jennifer's tone in recent months, sharp, tired, always rushing, whispered otherwise. The smell of roasted food had turned powered overnight. I walked to the kitchen, opened a window, and let the cold morning air rush in. Frost coated the grass outside, and my breath fogged the glass as I looked out toward the empty driveway. Once, there had been 2 cars there, mine and Margaret's. She always parked slightly crooked, no matter how many times I teased her. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to park in her spot for a year. Then Jennifer moved back in, and David's black SUV filled it without hesitation. I'd said nothing, but the first time I saw it there, something in me recoiled. Now both spaces were empty again. I started cleaning. It was a slow, deliberate act, scraping congealed gravy into the trash, wrapping cold turkey in foil, washing dishes one by one. The clinking of plates echoed through the house, each sound sharp against the silence. I worked until the table was bare, the only evidence of the night before a faint ring from a wine glass on the linen cloth. When I finally sat down with my coffee, the house groaned under its own quiet. The same house Margaret and I bought in 1988, our dream home, our forever home. She'd filled every room with warmth, color, and laughter. After she passed, the colors faded, but when Jennifer moved back in for a brief moment, I thought the house would live again. It was 3 years ago. Jennifer had shown up one rainy afternoon, soaked and shivering, her eyes rimmed red from crying. "Dad, I hate to ask, but could David and I stay here while we look for a place? Just temporarily." Of course, I said yes. I didn't even hesitate. The house had been too quiet, too still. The thought of having them here, voices in the hallways, footsteps on the stairs, felt like a small miracle. "You don't have to ask, honey. This is your home. Stay as long as you need." She'd smiled through tears and hugged me. "Just a couple of months, I promise." That was 3 years ago. At first, it was wonderful. We cooked dinner together. Jennifer helped me clean out Margaret's closet, something I'd avoided for years. David mowed the lawn, fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen. We watched movies on Fridays. I remember one night Jennifer fell asleep on the couch, her head on my shoulder, just like when she was a kid. I sat there for an hour, afraid to move. Then slowly things changed. David started working from home, loud conference calls that took over the living room. Jennifer's makeup and clothes began spreading into every room. My quiet study became David's office. He brought in computer equipment, a second monitor, speakers. My books, the ones I'd collected over a lifetime, were boxed and moved to the garage. I told myself it was temporary, that they'd find a place soon. But weeks became months. David began ordering expensive gadgets and furniture online. Each time a delivery truck pulled up, I wondered where the money came from. I'd offered to help them get a loan for a house, but David always waved me off. "We're managing fine," he'd say, smiling that practiced smile of his. Jennifer grew distant. She stopped joining me for coffee in the mornings, stopped asking how I was. She spent most of her time on her phone or out with friends. I tried not to take it personally. She was young, she had her own life, but sometimes I'd catch her glancing at me like I was a burden, like she was waiting for me to say something wrong. The first real crack appeared one evening. I was walking past their room when I heard David's voice through the door. "Why are we even looking at apartments? Your dad's alone in this big house. He probably likes having us here." Jennifer sighed. "I don't know. We said it was temporary." "Temporary was 2 years ago," he said, his tone hard. "Face it, this works for everyone." I froze in the hallway. My hand gripped the railing so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I should have knocked, said something, but I didn't. I just turned and walked back to my room, pretending I hadn't heard. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when my home had stopped being mine. It wasn't just the space they took. It was the small, quiet things. My mail opened on the counter, my groceries replaced with brands I didn't recognize. My old armchair moved from its spot because it didn't match the decor. And Jennifer, my Jennifer, stopped calling me Dad. It started subtly. "Hey, Elwood, have you seen the mail?" Then, "Elwood, we're out of milk." The first time she said it, I laughed, thinking it was a joke. But when she didn't correct herself, something inside me shrank. I didn't correct her either. I remember one evening 6 months ago, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching her and David laugh at something on TV. For a brief moment, it felt almost normal. I'd made popcorn, just like when she was a kid. I walked over, bowl in hand. "Hey, you two want some?" David looked up. "No thanks, Elwood. We just had dinner." Jennifer didn't even look away from the screen. I stood there a second longer, then nodded and went back to the kitchen. I ate the popcorn alone. Boom. By then, I'd started to sense something ugly beneath the surface. An impatience, a quiet resentment. David began to talk about upgrading the house. He'd walk through rooms, saying things like, "We could knock out this wall, open it up a bit," as if we were the homeowners. I'd smile politely, but every word felt like a trespass. Then there were the bills. One morning, I came home from the grocery store to find David at the kitchen counter, opening my mail. "Hey, Elwood," he said casually, holding up an envelope. "This electric bill looks high. You might want to check if they're overcharging you." He said it like he owned the place. I reached out to take it, but he set it back down with that same easy smile. "Just trying to help. We all need to watch expenses, you know." I remember standing there, staring at him, realizing that he genuinely believed this was his home now. That night, I went into my study, what was left of it, and opened the filing cabinet where I kept all the important papers. The property deed, the title, the insurance. I touched each one like they were proof of my sanity, proof that this house was still mine, that I hadn't imagined my own erasure. Then, when I went back upstairs, I saw Jennifer asleep on the couch, David's arm around her, the TV flickering blue light over their faces. I stood there a long time, remembering when I used to carry her up to bed after she fell asleep watching cartoons. I wondered if she'd even remember those days now. The weeks after that blurred together. They stopped telling me their plans. Sometimes they'd disappear for weekends without a word. When they came back, they'd bring expensive shopping bags, new clothes, gadgets. I never asked where they went or how they afforded it. I didn't want the answer. Then came Thanksgiving. The one night I'd hoped would remind her that this was still family, that I was still her father. And instead, a single text had ended everything. Now, sitting at the clean table, staring at the empty space where the turkey had been, I realized something simple and cruel. They hadn't just left for Europe. They'd been leaving for years, inch by inch, smile by smile, until there was nothing left to take except my silence. The phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Linda next door. "Morning, Elwood. Hope everything's okay. I saw your lights on all night." I stared at it for a while, then typed back, "Everything's fine, just couldn't sleep, thank you." A lie, of course, but easier than explaining that the only family I had left had finally told me the truth, that they didn't want me. I poured another cup of coffee and looked around the kitchen. Margaret's china gleamed faintly under the light. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner now, instead of sage and butter. Clean, empty. And for the first time, I felt something else beneath the sadness. Not anger, not grief, but a kind of focus, a quiet, deliberate thought forming like ice. If they wanted to get away from me, they would, but not with what was mine. The morning air felt heavier than usual, thick with frost and silence. I wandered from room to room, the floorboards creaking under my weight, each sound magnified in the empty house. The Thanksgiving table, now cleared of cold turkey and untouched side dishes, sat like a ghost of what could have been. Plates stacked neatly in the sink, candles stubbed down to nubs, and the smell of roast turkey lingering, faint and sour. I hadn't moved from the living room since sunrise. The house felt cavernous, cold. The walls seemed farther apart, the ceilings higher, as if mocking the emptiness. I poured myself a cup of coffee, watching the steam rise in a lazy spiral, and stared out the window. Frost coated the driveway, a thin white layer sparkling in the weak November sun. No cars, no footprints, just snow on concrete, and an unbroken silence that wrapped the house in quiet accusation. I thought of Jennifer, of David. 3 years. 3 years of temporary visits that had become permanent overstay. I'd allowed them to slowly take over this house, this life I had built with Margaret. And now, in one cruel final text, they had made it clear. They wanted nothing more to do with me. The phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. Their message was still vivid in my mind. "Old man, we flew to Europe to get away from you. Stop bothering us." I remembered every slight, every intrusion, every moment they'd made this home, theirs and mine, inconsequential. I remembered David sifting through my mail like it was his right. Jennifer calling me Elwood instead of Dad. The gradual encroachment on everything I held dear. until it was all theirs. And yet, despite the betrayal, I felt a strange calm. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. Something deep inside had settled, a slow, deliberate focus that I hadn't known I was capable of. A knock at the back door pulled me from the memory. I turned slowly and saw Linda Harrison standing there, bundled in a heavy coat, scarf around her neck, her face etched with concern. Her eyes were wide as they flicked to the house behind me, to the untouched Thanksgiving table visible through the kitchen window. "Elwood," she said softly, "I saw your lights still on. Is everything okay with dinner?" Her voice carried genuine worry, and I felt a pang of gratitude. Linda had always been the kind neighbor, the one who would bring over cookies on birthdays, check the mailbox when the snow was deep, ask about my health without making it awkward. She wasn't here to judge. She was just human. I walked slowly to the door, opened it just enough to acknowledge her presence. "Everything's fine, Linda," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "Just running late. You know how it is." Her gaze drifted past me to the table behind, the single water glass at my place, the cold food, the empty chairs. She hesitated. "If you need anything, you know where I am." "Thank you," I said, closing the door gently. "Good morning." Through the kitchen window, I watched her walk back across her lawn, her eyes flicking over her shoulder one last time before disappearing behind her door. I went back to the table and sat in my chair. The candles had burned down further, the flames guttering in the remaining wax. I stared at the empty chairs. Jennifer's, David's, Margaret's. 6 years since Margaret had passed, and now, after all this time, it felt as though everyone I had loved had abandoned me. I thought about Margaret. I remembered her laughter in the kitchen, the way she had perfected the art of folding napkins, the care she took in setting the table so it always felt like home. I remembered the smell of her perfume, the warmth of her hands when she held mine. I remembered her saying, "Elwood, it's just family. No need to be perfect." But now perfection had been met with rejection. I stood and walked through the house, methodical, as if checking each room for evidence that I had, in some way, failed. Bedrooms untouched, bathrooms neat. The guest room, Jennifer and David's room, looked like a museum of their belongings, still in place from when they left. Clothes spilling from drawers, books stacked haphazardly, David's dumbbells in the corner of the sunroom I used for reading. Every detail of their presence lingering in the house like a ghost. I walked past the study, my old desk where I had spent countless hours drafting opinions and presiding over family court cases, now held David's computer setup. Dual monitors, speakers, a mess of wires. Margaret's desk chair had been moved aside. I ran my fingers along the polished wood, the familiar ridges, the cold smoothness. This was my space, my sanctuary, and yet it had been trespassed, slowly, subtly, irreversibly. I paused in front of the fireplace. The fire was cold, ashes gray. I remembered sitting here with Jennifer as a child, her head on my shoulder while we read stories of knights and dragons. I remembered late nights with Margaret, sipping wine, talking quietly about dreams we'd never chased. I remembered laughter and warmth and family. And now, silence. A thought began to form, tentative at first, then stronger, more deliberate. If they wanted to get away from me, if they wanted to erase me from this house, from this life, I wouldn't let them take it without a fight. I went to the filing cabinet and pulled out the property deed, Margaret's will, insurance papers. I spread them across the desk in the study, careful to align the corners, meticulous as always. Every document, every piece of proof, a reminder that this house, everything in it, belonged to me. I remembered each slight, each intrusion, each word that had slowly undermined my place here. Jennifer calling me Elwood instead of Dad, David rifling through my mail. The gradual accumulation of their things, their life invading mine until I had been left with nothing. I poured myself a cup of coffee, cold now, and sat at the desk. The house was quiet, too quiet, and yet the quiet felt alive. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of birds, the wind brushing past the windows. And in that quiet, I felt something awaken inside me. Not rage, not despair. Clarity, precision, focus. I thought of Marcus Webb, my former assistant from family court, the one who had watched me preside over cases, draft rulings, manage every detail with exacting care. I knew he would understand, would help me act deliberately, methodically, legally. I made a mental note. This afternoon I would call Marcus, not to rage, not to beg, to act. The neighbor's knock, the empty chairs, the cold turkey, the betrayed love of my family, all of it formed a single coherent thought in my mind. If they wanted to get away from me, if they wanted to erase me, I would respond, and I would respond with precision. For now, though, I sat quietly at the desk, surrounded by papers, watching the light shift across the room. Frost glinted on the windows, sunlight glinting through dust motes like tiny stars. The house was silent, but I was not defeated. I was thinking, planning, remembering. And for the first time since Margaret passed, I felt ready. The day stretched long and quiet, each hour marked only by the ticking of the grandfather clock and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. I sat in my study, the papers sprawled before me like a map, every document a piece of the truth. The property deed, Margaret's will, title insurance policies, all aligned neatly, corners squared. This was the proof. This was the law. This was mine. I poured a second cup of coffee, cold now, and sipped, slowly tasting the bitterness, letting it sharpen my mind. Each sip reinforced a realization that had been forming quietly over the past 3 years. Jennifer and David hadn't just abandoned me. They had taken what they wanted, assumed what they didn't earn, and erased the man who had built the life they were now trying to claim as theirs. I thought back to their words, the casual cruelty hidden in the guise of temporary visits, kindness or obligation. David's smug confidence in rifling through my mail, Jennifer's careful avoidance of the word dad, the way they rearranged my house to suit their own lives. Every slight cataloged in my mind, every action noted, every memory a breadcrumb leading to this moment. I moved to the phone and dialed Marcus Webb. His voice came on the second ring, familiar, reliable. "Judge Turner," he said, a hint of surprise in his tone. "This is a surprise." "Marcus," I said evenly, each word deliberate, measured. "I need your help, legal help." There was a pause, then, "Of course. Can you meet this afternoon?" "I'd rather discuss it in person. 2 o'clock. My office." "Understood. I'll be there." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, letting my hands rest on the armrests. I had been a judge for over 30 years. I knew how to analyze, how to plan, how to anticipate. This was no different. The only difference was the stakes were personal. The house was quiet, almost expectant, as though it too understood the shift that had occurred. I began photographing every room, evidence, documentation, memory. Jennifer's clothes spilling from the closet of the guest room, David's dumbbells occupying the sunroom, dishes stacked in the sink from meals they had taken without invitation. I photographed everything with meticulous care, each frame a record, a testament. Then I walked into my office, what had been my sanctuary, and paused. David's computer equipment now covered the antique desk Margaret had refinished with her own hands. I studied it, noting the dual monitors, the tangled cables, the casual occupation of space that was mine. Every photograph I took documented their trespass. I sat at the desk and began drafting a detailed list, a chronology of every offense, every intrusion, every betrayal. April 12th, 2022. Jennifer promising to stay just a couple of months. September 2023. Overhearing David suggesting they remain permanently, Jennifer acquiescing. 2 months ago, David rifling through my mail, speaking as if entitled. I wrote down everything. No detail too small. Each note a building block for the action I would take. My handwriting was precise, methodical, the same way I drafted rulings from the bench for decades. By noon, I had organized every document, every photograph, every note into a clear sequence. The timeline of usurpation, the evidence of their presumption, the proof that this house, every room, every fixture, every corner, was legally mine. Margaret's will left it all to me. The property deed, the title insurance, ironclad. And now, with careful planning, I would enforce it. I poured another cup of coffee and checked the clock. 2 o'clock. Marcus would arrive soon. When he entered, he surveyed the office with his usual calm, analytical gaze. "I see you've been busy," he said, eyes flicking to the photographs, the documents, the notes meticulously aligned on the desk. "Yes," I replied. 3 years of subtle trespass, 2 months of overt disregard, and tonight I want to act. Marcus leaned forward. "You have the deeds, the will, the evidence. Legally, they've been living here as tenants at will. You can remove them, reclaim control. There's no gray area. This is solid." I nodded, feeling the weight of years lift slightly. I want everything accounted for. Utilities, mail, access, property rights. Everything they assumed as theirs must be corrected. And it must be undeniable. He opened his notebook. "We'll draft notices, prepare filings, and secure the house. Every step documented, legally airtight. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late to contest." I stood and walked the halls again, imagining each room as it should be. My home restored to its rightful order. The guest room where Jennifer and David had sprawled, leaving traces of their presence everywhere. It would be empty. The sunroom, once my reading nook, reclaimed. My office, my sanctuary, untouched. I took another photograph, a wide shot of the living room, empty chairs, the fireplace cold. The absence of family, the betrayal of blood, and the quiet dominance of the law, all recorded. By late afternoon, we had a plan. Notices drafted, legal filings prepared. The first step would be sending them a formal eviction notice, a document simple in its language but devastating in effect. The house, its contents, all utilities, all access, legally theirs no longer. The evidence would be ready if they challenged it. The timeline precise. Every action backed by law, by fact, by irrefutable documentation. I felt a calm satisfaction, a clarity I had not known since Margaret passed. Anger had been replaced with method, betrayal replaced with precision. The house itself seemed to respond, windows catching the low sun, reflecting light across the hardwood floors, dust motes dancing in golden shafts, the smell of coffee mixed with the faint scent of clean counters, the faintest echo of roasted turkey from yesterday. It was quiet, but it was alive, and I was in command. I walked back to my office, sat down at the desk, and reviewed the timeline once more. Jennifer's laughter from 3 years ago, her whispered apologies for staying too long, David's casual invasions. Every moment cataloged, every slight recorded. By tomorrow, the house would be mine again. By tomorrow, the narrative would change. I poured myself another cup of coffee. Marcus leaned back, folding his hands. "You're ready for this," he said. "Yes," I replied, "and I will do it properly. Every detail, every motion, every document in order. They cannot deny me. They cannot fight this. Not legally, not morally." The sun dipped low, painting the study in amber and gray. I looked out the window, imagining their reaction when they returned from Europe to a house that would no longer recognize them as tenants, as family, as anything more than strangers. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt a quiet victory simmering in the depths of my chest. They had abandoned me, yes. They had betrayed me, yes. But justice, deliberate and exacting, was mine to deliver. The house felt different the morning I decided to close the book. Not lighter exactly. Not triumphant in a shout. More like a long, slow inhale before a steady exhale. I'd spent days arranging facts, stitching together timelines, photographing every corner where their lives had seeped into mine. I'd called Marcus, drafted notices, and prepared filings with the same meticulous care I'd once used to shape opinions from the bench. Now the legal engine was primed. The only thing left was to turn the key. My hands didn't tremble when I dialed the numbers that would sever convenience from assumption. I called the bank first. The clerk's voice, polite and procedural, asked a dozen questions. Security verifications, account numbers, the names on the title. I answered each one plainly. Yes, I am the sole surviving heir named on the decedent's will. Yes, I have the deed. Yes, please freeze these accounts linked to my name and revoke the debit and credit cards issued under my Social Security. The representative typed and clicked, a soft symphony of bureaucracy, and then, all set, we'll send written confirmation. That little confirmation felt like the first line of defense raised around a citadel. Next, the utility companies. Marcus had advised me to be systematic. Electric, water, gas, cable, internet. I called each, told the truth as simply as I could, that people who had been living in my home were not authorized account holders, that access needed to be changed, that locks should be considered. Some representatives were sympathetic. One was brusque. The world runs on forms and signatures, and for once, I welcomed them. Each phone call made me feel less like a man abandoned and more like a steward reclaiming order out of entropy. By noon, the locksmith arrived, cheerful and efficient. He replaced the front door deadbolt, the one that had turned easily for their keys for 3 years. He fitted a new cylinder and handed me a small, heavy key. It felt like something solid I could hold on to, not an answer to grief, but a tool that would keep the house aligned with its legal owner. There was a procedural cruelty to the steps I took. I had the eviction notice prepared and mailed in the way Marcus recommended. Formal, legally precise, delivered certified. The notice stated plainly the grounds for termination of tenancy. They had not been accorded any formal tenancy rights. Their residence had always been permissive, and that permissive usage had been explicitly revoked. It asked them to vacate within a short but reasonable period. It offered help if they wanted to avoid court, but the tone was not conciliatory. It was the language of finality. I could have called them directly. I could have told them face to face the things I'd been cataloging for months. But the absence of their presence in my home had left my anger crystallized into something cold and exacting. Words in a courtroom are an art form. They're meant to be precise wrecking balls. I let the law speak where my heart might have merely shouted. After I'd finished the practical things, I sat at my desk and looked at the photographs again. The open mail on the counter, the narrow trail of detergent boxes leading from my pantry to the laundry room, the dent in the study desk where one of David's monitors had sat. I could have photographed their faces, the expressions of entitlement. Instead, I had photographed the evidence of ordinary life rearranged to fit someone else's definition of home. The photos weren't accusations as much as they were a map. This is where we were pushed aside. This is the path back. I did not gloat. I had no desire to savor humiliation. What I wanted was restoration, of space, of agency, of the sanctity of my wife's life, memorialized in china, in chairs, in the small rituals that had kept me grounded. That restoration required that I be competent and unshakable, and so I maintained an evenness I could trust. When I drove to the post office to sign for the certified mail myself, I felt every season of my life click past me like beads on a string. I signed the forms, returned home, and placed the official envelopes on the study desk. Marcus stopped by in the afternoon to double-check that everything had been done properly. He nodded approvingly at the neat stack of filings and copies. "You did this the right way," he said. "You left them no ambiguity. If they contest, we'll have everything. If they leave, then the house will heal." The most human of my actions, maybe the one that felt oddest to my own chest, was the one I took for Linda. I called her, and when she answered, I simply said, "If you see anything odd, please call me before you do anything else. I don't want neighbors panicking." She was grateful in the way a neighbor is, warm, worried, helpful. It was important to me that someone know I wasn't losing my mind. That small conversation anchored me. Then I did the thing that, in my own private life, felt the most like a line drawn in the sand. I called Jennifer. I expected to strike the same hollow chord as the text, to hear the same dismissive voice I had imagined behind her words. I prepared myself to be cold, then hung up without listening to voicemail. Instead, the call went to voicemail. Her greeting, clipped and casual, played through. "Hey, it's Jen. Leave a message." I left the simplest message I could muster. "Check your mail. We need to talk when you get back." No pleading, no entreaty, Only fact. Then I hung up. The call was not for reconciliation. It was a procedural notice. Human hearts have rituals like that too. Sometimes the ritual is a court filing. The next morning there were 37 missed calls. I had been in the garden trimming dead chrysanthemums at the front of the lawn, my hands more practiced at pruning than at gentleness, when my phone lit up in a way that made my skin feel thin. Jennifer's name, David's name, numbers I did not recognize, a string of frantic voicemails, each one a different flavor of disbelief. The first time I listened to a message, Jennifer's voice trembled in a way I had not heard in years. "Dad, what did you do? We're at Heathrow. The house, the house is locked." Marcus called and said, "Are you okay? Please call us." David's message was shorter, angrier. "You insane old—" He cut himself off, then a quieter, sharper plea. "We'll be there as soon as we can. You can't do this." I listened to them all. 37 missed calls and a cascade of messages. Some were panicked, some were furious. One or two were sharp and pleading. One was from a number I didn't recognize, probably Jennifer's friend or colleague, asking what had happened. Linda left a voicemail too. "Elwood, are you all right? The front door was locked this morning and there were papers on the porch. I'm so worried." I called her back and told her simply, "I'm fine. I handled it." When they landed at the airport, they called again, each call a thunderclap. Their voices overlapped on my voicemail like waves breaking, small and then high, and then small again. I could hear the boutiques and the airport announcements behind their words, the detachment of having been away. For a moment, I felt the old, raw wish to take them in my arms and say, "I'm sorry, come home." But that impulse was smothered beneath months of being sidelined and belittled. When they arrived at the house, I was already there. The locksmith had finished his work the day before, and I had the new keys in my pocket, keys that fit perfectly and turned with a satisfying certainty. The driveway held the echo of tires, the neighbors' bushes bearing frost like powdered sugar. I stood at the front door as they approached, both of them carrying duffel bags, faces flushed from travel and indignation. They stopped when they saw me, as though expecting me to grovel, to crumble, to produce the long, sobbing repentance of a man who'd been foolish enough to expect civility from his own kin. Instead, I met their eyes with something steadier. I had practiced this look in the quiet hours, measured, implacable, unadorned. Jennifer's face flickered through 5 expressions in the span of a breath: confusion, anger, hurt, calculation, and then the sort of numbness people put on when something very dear to them is no longer theirs to command. David's jaw worked like a man trying to hold back language that might undo him. "Dad," Jennifer said, with the brittle politeness of someone confronting a stranger. "What happened? Who did this?" "You did," I said. Not unkindly, not bitterly, just a fact. "I revoked the permissive use of the property. I've sent notices. You had your chance to formalize anything you wanted here, and you declined. This house is not yours to assume." David stepped up, forward. "You can't do that. You can't just lock us out." "Yes, I can," I said. "You were permissive occupants. That permissive right is revoked. I followed the legal steps. It's in the paperwork. Marcus will show you the filings if you want to contest anything." Jennifer's eyes shone with betrayals untold. "You did this while we were in Europe?" "You left me a message." I let the memory of the text pulse in the air between us. "You said you flew to get away from me. I accepted that you wanted distance." "You don't get to punish us like this," David said, and there was an edge in his voice that spoke more of fear than of reason. "What I did," I said, "was remove access where there was no legal right. You were given every chance to establish tenancy or pay rent or share expenses. Instead, you appropriated my house and my life until it suited you to leave me with a note." Jennifer's composure cracked. "You could have called. We could have talked. We could have—" "We did talk in a way," I said. "Your words told me enough." I could see in her face then a sudden, disorienting, childlike grief, the kind that arrives when a person realizes a safety net has been systematically removed while they remain distracted. She took a step closer, pleading in a voice that was nearly the one she used when she was 5 and had fallen from a bicycle. "Dad, please, We'll fix it. We'll make it right. I thought of the nights she had called me Elwood, of the mornings she ignored my presence like a dripping faucet. I thought of the way David had rearranged my life with the easy confidence of someone moving into a furnished suite. I appreciate the offer, I said finally, but there are consequences to assuming what isn't yours. The house isn't just bricks, Jennifer. It's memory. It's what Margaret and I built. It's my home. If you want to pursue restoring your place here, there's a process. I didn't choose this because I wanted to hurt you. I chose it because I wanted to be the steward of what Margaret left me. Jennifer's lips trembled. She looked at David and then at me and swallowed. Do you want us to leave? She asked, voice small. I could have told her to stay and carry the burden of proving her worth, to make restitution out of contrition and labor. I could have made this about the maintenance of a household, a chore list to satisfy my wounded pride. But there is a mercy that comes from order. When people are given a clean and fair rule, they know where to start. Leave it, I said. For now, take what you can with you that you can prove is yours. If you want to dispute anything, follow the legal channels Marcus outlined. If not, leave quietly. No police, no drama. They left that day with duffel bags, confusion, and a furious, flaring sense of injustice. Their footsteps on the porch were hard and hurried. And when the car pulled away, I wondered if they would return as litigants or not return at all. I wondered if their departure would fix the ache they had left behind or deepen it into a new, colder silence. Either way, the house seemed to exhale. That night, for the first time in a long while, I cooked a small meal for myself. Not a feast, not a performance, a modest plate of roasted vegetables and a slice of the pumpkin pie I'd frozen. I sat at the table with the same china, the same folded napkin, and I ate slowly. The food tasted like independence in the quiet after the storm. The next morning, the house felt cleaner in its new arrangement. The sun came through the windows and caught dust motes in the corners where their belongings had been. I walked through every room and set things back in the way Margaret had liked them. I moved her favorite teacup to the shelf she had always kept it on. I opened the study blinds and let light spill across the desk on the unmarked wood that had borne so many decisions. There was no rejoicing, no triumphal music, only a steady, slow reclamation. I called the housekeepers I'd known for years and scheduled a deep clean. I went through drawers and boxes, returning things to the places they had been before they were rearranged, mindful of the ritual of care that keeps a home from becoming only a building. Neighbors left casseroles and notes and awkward apologies. Linda brought over a bowl of soup and stayed for an hour, knitting needle-clicking softly while I told her some of it. Not the legal minutiae and the bitter calculus, but the small human history. Margaret's garden, Jennifer's childhood laughter, the things that mattered. She listened and held the space for me. In that ordinary neighborly act, the wound felt less raw. The house would heal slowly. Paperwork would tidy the immediate forms of trespass, but the deeper repairs, the memories, the hollow places, take a different kind of tending. I knew that. I also knew that tending it now was for me. It was not a performance for anyone else. The bonds I had once mistaken for permanence had dissolved through neglect and small violences. Now the work I did was one of repair, of rebuilding a life that was mine to steward. Months later, friends asked if I regretted how I had handled things, if I had been cruel. I told them the truth plainly. Sometimes the body needs to set boundaries before the heart can understand them. Saying no was not the same as wanting to hurt. It was a statement that some things could not be assumed, that respect had to be mutual, or not at all. There were quiet nights when I walked through the house with a flashlight, thinking of Margaret, of Jennifer's small hands, of the years gone by. The house listened, the wood remembered. Sometimes late at night, I would place a single slice of pumpkin pie on Margaret's side of the table, light a candle, and talk to her about the day. It was not a replacement for family, but it was a ritual that kept me tethered to something true. In the end, the most surprising thing was not the absence of Jennifer and David, but the return of myself. Not the same man who had set a perfect table and waited, but a man who knew he could set it again and sit, content in the knowledge that his home reflected how he wished to live. The law had given me back my house. The work of rebuilding, gave me back my life. On the day I cleared the last box from the garage, my phone buzzed. A message from Jennifer. Can we talk? No accusation, no demand, something small and tentative, like the first green shoot in spring. I read the words slowly and then placed the phone down. I did not reply immediately. I let the light in the window catch the dust motes and thought of all the things I would want to say if we ever sat across a table again. Not to absolve or condemn, but to ask, kindly and plainly, what we had meant to each other. The house would be the setting, not the prize. If they came back with honest hearts, there would be conversations to be had. If not, the house would still be here, with its china and its ghosts and the small, steady life I had reclaimed. That night, I lit a candle on the table and poured myself a cup of coffee. The house hummed softly with its evening breath. Outside, a distant radio played a song Margaret had liked. I listened and let the melody thread through the rooms, through the years, until the house felt full, not of people taking what they wanted, but of what remained, memory, order, and a quiet dignity I had not realized I would ever have again. I picked up my fork, lifted the fork to my mouth, and tasted something that had been missing for too long. The quiet piece of a life made intact again, not by grand gestures, but by the slow work of reclaiming a home and the stubborn, steady tending of the heart.